Okay, so thank you all for being here again. And I hope that was enough time to complete the warm-up activity. And I want you all to continue to think about these warm-up activities as an opportunity to connect concepts that we've talked about in the past, as well as a brief introduction to the lesson for today. Today's lesson is titled Carbohydrates and Lipids. Today's date is January 13th, 2021. So go ahead and write that down as I read the objectives. Today we've got two objectives. The first one is to compare and contrast the two energy-producing organic compounds, carbohydrates and lipids. The second objective is to relate the structure of carbs and lipids to the survival of living organisms. So we always want to come back to that context of what's the whole purpose of this? How does this contribute to life on Earth? Would anybody like to go ahead and quickly read the essential question for us?
What are the important similarities and differences between carbohydrates and lipids?
Excellent, thank you. So your asynchronous assignment today is going to have you actually write out some of the differences and similarities between carbohydrates and lipids and put them in a nice, useful mind map. So we'll talk about that later on. But again, when we think about taking efficient and effective and organized notes, we always want to start with a title and the date. And if you have some time, you might want to write down the objectives or the essential question just to give you an idea of what today's lesson was about when you go back and you review your notes. So yesterday we talked about organic compounds and we gave them several different names. We said that sometimes you'll hear me refer to organic compounds as macromolecules or biomolecules, even polymers, but we're still always talking about those same four things: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So today we're going to talk about the first two, carbs and lipids. But the reason we consider these organic compounds, we talked about this yesterday, is that they have carbon and hydrogen bonds. So maybe you've heard of propane before. You've heard of a propane tank or propane gas, which is used to power some gas grills. Propane is a very simple gas. It's a very simple organic compound. It's got 3 carbon atoms represented by these gray circles with a C on them. And the carbon atoms are surrounded by hydrogen atoms. So all in all, it's got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hydrogen atoms. So its chemical formula is C3H8. C3H8 is propane. But the reason we would consider propane an organic compound is because we have these yellow bonds present, which are connecting carbon and hydrogen. Okay, so that's what makes propane and similar molecules organic. It has those carbon-hydrogen bonds. Inorganic compounds do not have carbon-hydrogen bonds, and that could be for a number of reasons. It could be because it doesn't have carbon. For example, water is H2O. There's no carbon in water, so of course it doesn't have carbon-hydrogen bonds. It could be because it doesn't have hydrogen, like carbon dioxide. Oops, where's my mouse? Carbon dioxide does not have hydrogen. So again, can't have carbon-hydrogen bonds if there's not both carbon and hydrogen. It could be that it has neither carbon nor hydrogen, like table salts, which is sodium chloride, NaCl. Or it could be that the carbon and the hydrogen are there, but they're not bonded to one another. That's pretty rare. Typically, if carbon and hydrogen are present in the same molecule, then they are bonded together. But regardless, even though these compounds do not have carbon-hydrogen bonds, which means that they are inorganic, they are still very important for survival. So I don't want you all to think automatically that organic means things that are essential for life and inorganic means things that are abiotic. That's not the case. Inorganic things, they are abiotic, they're not living by themselves, but they are still important for life. Water is still something that all living things on Earth need. Carbon dioxide is essential for organisms that do photosynthesis. They need carbon dioxide. Oxygen is essential for almost all living things on Earth. Okay, so these inorganic compounds are still important, even though we would consider them to be inorganic. That's just because they don't have carbon hydrogen bonds. Another thing we discussed yesterday were the terms monomer and polymer. So last week we introduced prefixes and suffixes that really help us to break down big words that are unfamiliar to us. And the prefixes and suffixes that are important here are just the prefix, there are no suffixes here, but the prefix that is important here is monomer, mono, M-O-N-O, and poly, in polymer. So mono means one or something that is singular. And then of course, poly means something that is many or plural. A monomer is a singular building block. It's something that is not connected or attached to anything else. It exists by itself. It's just one subunit. A polymer, on the other hand, is made up of at least two of those subunits. It's made up of one monomer that's connected to another monomer. You could also have any number of monomers that make up a polymer. There could be a polymer of 3 monomers, 1, 2, 3, as we see here. There could be a polymer of 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 monomers, as we see there. But in reality, most of the organic compounds that we're talking about are made up of dozens, if not hundreds, of monomers. Okay, so they're quite large and they're pretty complex structures. But our 4 organic molecules, which are polymers, are made up each of their own type of monomer. They're each made up of their own type of monomer. So that's important to know. We don't see the monomer that makes up a carbohydrate also making up a lipid. Lipids have their own monomers. All right, so here's a question for you all, my honors class, and I know you all are equipped to answer it. The question is, if a type of polymer is made up of the same monomers, how do we end up with so many different types of polymers? For example, all proteins, which is a polymer, are made up of amino acids, which is a monomer. But there are hundreds of types of proteins, thousands, millions of types of proteins. So if they're made up of the same things, the same amino acids, how do we end up with so many different proteins? And you could say the same thing for carbohydrates. All carbohydrates are made up of monosaccharides. But how do we end up with so many hundreds of different types of carbohydrates? What do you all think? DNA is another example, Carolyn. So DNA is a nucleic acid, so it's a polymer. Okay, so Michelle is on the right track. Some might have more, she says polymers. Maybe we might want to switch that word out for monomers than others. Okay, so Janelle is thinking that there might be different chemicals involved. Good. Melissa is thinking that they might be bonded differently. So we're identifying that there has to be some kind of difference. And I think you guys are all on the right track. The answer is one that we're going to continue to come back to in this course. It's going to be a central theme of biology this year. And the answer is that the shape and the orientation matters, meaning the order that you place those monomers in matters. So if we use Carolyn's example, she said DNA. DNA is a nucleic acid, so we're looking in this column on the left, and therefore its monomer is called a nucleotide. You can see we're linking one nucleotide to the next. We're just linking one to the next, one to the next. Now there are 4 different types of nucleotides for DNA, and we'll talk about this later in the course. But there's A, there's T, there's C, and there's G. Now, even with those 4, I can come up with billions of combinations because I can have I could have a DNA strand that is 10 bases long, and I have AAATTCGCG. That gives me one strand of DNA. But I could switch any of those letters out, right? So that the combinations are endless. Same thing with proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. Amino acid is the monomer of a protein. But there are 20 different amino acids. So even in those 20, I can combine them in different ways, and they have different properties. And that's what Janelle was talking about. They have different chemical properties. Some of them like water, some of them don't like water. Some of them have an electrical charge, and some of them don't have an electrical charge. And because of their different chemical properties, now we're talking about Melissa's comment, which is that they bond differently. Things that like water don't like to be near things that don't like water. Things that have a positive chemical charge don't like to be near other things that also have a positive chemical charge. They prefer to be near negatively charged things. So when you think about all those different chemical qualities and how they interact with one another, you end up with all these different possibilities of proteins. So just 20 amino acids gives us billions of different proteins. So here's the theme that I do want you all to write down, and you'll hear me say it a lot through the course. Structure determines function. Structure determines function. Structure determines function. You will hear me say that a lot throughout this semester. And what that really means is that the shape matters. If you change the shape, or if you change how things are ordered and placed next to one another, then you're ultimately going to change what that thing does or is able to do. You might even prevent it from doing anything, depending on how you change the shape. It might even be just a small change. But changing the shape will ultimately change the function. Okay. So shape determines function. So the first organic compound that we'll think about more specifically today is carbohydrates. And the four things that we really want to think about and memorize when it comes to all of our four organic compounds is function. We want to know the function of all four. We want to know the monomer of all four. We want to know the atoms that make them up, and we want to have some examples of all four as well. If you can do those things, and I'm gonna show you all a chart that'll be handy, and I want you all to copy down. But if you can memorize those four things, the function, the monomer, the atoms, and some examples of all of our four organic compounds, then you will be A-okay. That's the big gist of this first unit: the function, the monomer, the atoms, and examples. So the function of carbs is that they provide quick energy. And what we mean by quick energy is short-term energy, energy that's available within the first 24 hours to be used. You don't want carbohydrates to be stored, because when they get stored, they end up being stored as lipids, aka fats, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. Okay, so when you intake and digest carbohydrates, you want to be able to use them quickly. And the way I like to think about it is a sugar rush. Carbohydrates are sugars. So if you've ever eaten a lot of candy at once, it's possible that you gave yourself a sugar rush. You were feeling pretty jittery. You may have been bouncing a little bit, bouncing your leg up and down. You were talking faster. It was difficult to organize your thoughts. That's because your body is burning off some of those carbohydrates that you just took in, eating all that sugar. Okay, so carbohydrates are sugars, and they give you sugar rushes if you eat a lot because your body is trying to use that energy quickly. It doesn't want to have to store that energy. Another function that we'll talk more about in the second unit is that carbs make up the cell walls of plant cells. And JT said that happened to you yesterday. It's funny. Thank you for joining us, Abina. I will change my attendance. But yes, carbs make up the cell walls of plant cells. We'll talk more about that and what a cell wall is in our second unit. The monomer that makes up a carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. Again, mono means one, sac, S-A-C-C-H, means sugar, or sacar, like azúcar is sugar in Spanish. Saccharide is sugar in Latin, I believe, S-A-C-C-H-A-R. So one sugar. The most common monosaccharide is called glucose. And glucose is a 6-ring or a 6-carbon ring. So it's a hexagon shape. So here's a very basic representation of what glucose is. A 6-ring, 6-carbon ring. Each of the corners here would have a carbon in them. Carbon here, carbon here, carbon here, so on and so forth. So the monomer of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide, aka a glucose molecule. We've got to memorize that, and it'll be easier once we go over it a lot. A polymer looks like this, right? If this is a monomer, then a polymer is literally just this same thing, but copied and chained next to one another. So we're just chaining these glucose molecules, these monosaccharides together. And in doing so, we create a polysaccharide. So several different monosaccharides linked together. It's called a polysaccharide. The atoms that make up a carbohydrate are the same 3 atoms that we're going to see in all 4 of our organic compounds, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. But with carbs, they exist in a special ratio. They exist in a 1:2:1 ratio. I'll explain exactly what that means on the next slide. Hopefully you have some thoughts already. So they appear carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 1:2:1 ratio. This is an important slide. That's why I'm leaving it up for so long. I'm going to give it about 30 more seconds for folks to copy down what they're seeing or take a screenshot or a picture. Okay. So you want to think about this 1:2:1 ratio a little bit more. I've got a question for you. if a carbohydrate has 13 carbon atoms, how many hydrogen atoms will it have? And how many oxygen atoms will it have? Well, again, we want to remember that that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio exists. Carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen exist in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So what exactly does this mean? Let's take a look at it. I've got a column for my carbon atoms, a column for my hydrogen atoms, and a third column for my oxygen atoms. So if they're in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, this is what that means. If I have one carbon atom, I must have twice that number of hydrogen atoms, aka 2 hydrogen atoms. And I have that same number of oxygen atoms. So what about if I have 2 carbon atoms? How many hydrogens should I have? If there are 2 carbon atoms, good, then I should have, Abigail tells me, 4 hydrogen atoms and 2 oxygen atoms. What about if I have 6 hydrogen atoms? How many carbon atoms should I have? If there are 6 hydrogen, then how many carbons should there be? Good, Abigail. Or no, that's Melissa, I'm sorry. Thank you, Melissa. And how many oxygen atoms should I have in that case? Also 3, yep. What about if I have 124 oxygen atoms? How many carbon atoms should I have? If I have 124 oxygen atoms, how many carbon atoms should I have? Good, 124, excellent. A lot of people chipping in there. And how many hydrogen atoms should I have in that case? Excellent, excellent, excellent. Good. So this is what we mean by a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. Let's answer the question. If a carbohydrate has 13 carbon atoms, how many hydrogen atoms will it have? There are 13 carbon, then how many hydrogen? 26, good. And how many oxygen? 13, excellent. Good, so you guys got that, caught on very quickly, excellent. Now this is only for carbohydrates, but this is what makes carbohydrates special. So if I give you a question on your exam and I say that we found a mystery compound. This mystery compound has 3 elements in it: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. There are 45 carbon atoms in this compound. There are 90 hydrogen atoms in this compound, and there are 45 oxygen atoms in this compound. You should automatically know, oh, that's a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. That's a carbohydrate. And that there will be a question like that on your test, okay? So when you recognize that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, that should trigger thoughts in your mind about carbohydrates. Moving on. So here are your examples. Remember, we want to memorize those 4 things about each of our organic compounds. We want to know what they do, what the function is. We want to know what they're made of, so what its monomer is. We want to know what atoms it's made of, and then also we want to have some common examples. We want to know what examples are. So again, carbohydrates are sugars, and most sugars end in the letters OSE. That's so important, guys. Make things easier on yourself by picking up on these little hints. Please do write this down, what you see in red. Most sugars end in OSE. For example, glucose is a sugar. We see it ends in OSE. Cellulose is a sugar. It also ends in OSE. Some of you may be or may know someone who is lactose intolerant. Lactose is a sugar that is in milk, in dairy milk. There's also sucrose, there's fructose. Okay, so when we see those that OSE ending, automatically we know sugar, and that means that it must be a carbohydrate. And then there are a few other examples here that I want you all to be aware of, but we won't talk too much about them. And if you ever need me to go back, please just let me know. Or of course, you can wait and go back and watch the recording of our lessons. Okay. So again, glucose is the most common monosaccharide. There are others. There's galactose, which is amazingly basically the same thing as glucose. There's just one very, very small difference in their structure. If you're interested in stuff like this, definitely take AP biology, or maybe you can petition to have AP chemistry brought back as well. But glucose it just happens to be the most common monosaccharide, but it's not the only monosaccharide. Okay. So again, using our prefixes, let's see if we can come up with the name or names of these compounds. So I only have one ring here, 1 6-carbon ring. So what's the name of this organic compound if there's only one? It should be a blank saccharide. If there's only one, then what should it be?
Mono.
Mono, good. Thank you, Lisa. And I see, Michelle, you said the same thing. So this is a monosaccharide. Over here, I've got 2 carbon rings that are linked together. What do you all think that's called? What's my prefix for 2? Ah, good, Carolyn. That's a disaccharide. Di is a prefix meaning 2. Now down here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 rings that are linked together. There are potentially 2 answers for this. You could go with the specific prefix for 4, or you could come up with the general prefix for just something that's plural or many. So this would be a polysaccharide. Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Abigail. Thank you, JT. I keep wanting to say Abigail. Thank you, Melissa. Okay, but there is a prefix that means 4, and it's called tetra, T-E-T-R-A. So if you've ever heard of the video game Tetris, all of those pieces in Tetris that fall from the top of the screen, they're all made up of 4 blocks, which is where we get the word tetris. It's from tetra. So this could also be a tetrasaccharide, but that's okay. Polysaccharide works too. Okay. One big thing in our class is the importance of strong test-taking strategies, because the tests that we take in this class are pretty hard. Some of you actually did pretty well on the diagnostic exam, so I'm even more confident in this class's abilities. But of course, that exam is not being counted against you if you did not do well, but the exams are difficult, okay? And we need to get some practice with the types of questions we're gonna see. This question itself is not representative of the difficulty that you all will experience on the exams, but we want to think about some of our test-taking strategies. Number one, the most common mistake that I see among students is that they're not actually reading the question. They're not understanding what is being asked. So you've got to understand the question before you have any strong chance of answering the question correctly. One part of doing that is identifying key terms. So the question we are presented with here is, which of the following correctly describes a carbohydrate? Which of the following correctly describes a carbohydrate? Don't answer yet, but don't answer the actual question, but answer this question I'm about to ask. What is the key term in this question? What's the key term in this question?
Carbohydrate.
Good. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, JT. Thank you, DeJohn. So we've got carbohydrate is the most important key term here. Sometimes you'll have a question with 2, 3, 4 key terms. And that might sound difficult, but actually the more hints you're given, the more key terms you're given, the better. So here we're given one key term. One thing that we ask our biology students to consider doing, and I really strongly encourage you, practice this if you've never done it, is create a brain dump. So that's step 2, create your brain dump. A brain dump is when you have identified the key term, you try to write down things that are relevant to that key term or that are related to that key term.
I've done a brain dump before in my English 2 class. I've done that before.
Good. So that's a strategy. Again, that's not just useful for biology, but it's useful anytime you're taking an exam, especially multiple choice exams. So you see these terms, you identify these key terms, and now you want to get written on paper. You want to have some scratch paper where you can write down information that's related to that key term. And the reason I emphasize writing it down is because sometimes when you're moving through an exam, your brain is just processing so much information. You're seeing all these terms, some of which are not even related to one another. It's nice to have a piece of paper where you can just pause, write something down, and then if you move on, you might be able to come back to that information and be like, oh yeah, I did write down information from my brain dump already. So I can refer to that as I move through my test. So the brain dump is important. So what kind of information will we want to write in a brain dump based on that key term, carbohydrate? What information would we want to include? We would want to write down that the monomer of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. Good. What else might we include? Thank you, Abigail.
It gives you energy.
Excellent. What kind of energy? We want to specify what kind of energy it gives.
Quick.
Good. Yeah, excellent. We want to know that it gives short-term, quick energy. Anything else we might want to include?
What's that? Builds up a cell, like builds the cell up, I guess.
Good, yeah. We also might include that it contributes to the cell wall or the structure of the cell. Excellent. So with that information in our brain dump, we are in a much better position to answer the question. So after we do that, of course, we go back to the question. Again, we don't want to forget what's being asked of us. This question asks, which of the following correctly describes a carbohydrate? So at this point, we're in a good place to answer this question. And we haven't even looked at the answer choices yet. So that's what you all should, when you practice this, hopefully you'll get so good that even before looking at the answer choices, you kind of already have an idea of what the answer will be. You can make a prediction about what the answer will be. That way, when you look at the answer choices, you're not confusing yourself. You're not looking at these answer choices and you're like, wait, what am I being asked? Or wait, what's the difference between these two? You want to have a prediction about what the answer will be before you even look at the answer choices. And that will take you to the next level in terms of your test performance. So answer choice A says, a macromolecule that is made up of quick energy and cell structures and gives the body monosaccharides. Answer choice B says, a macromolecule that is made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in a 2:1:1 ratio. Answer choice C says, a macromolecule that is made up of monosaccharides and gives the body quick energy as well as cell structure. And then answer choice D, a macromolecule that is responsible for creating long-term energy for our cells and bodies. What do you all think? Type your answers into the chat and tell me what you think is the best answer here. So Lisa says, maybe C. Anybody else? C. Any others? Good. All right, we've got a lot of people saying C. And that is correct. C is the correct answer here. So our brain dump was really useful because we were told that we should be including three things really, and all three of them came up in this answer choice. Number one, we were told that monosaccharides are the monomers that make up carbohydrates, and it says that right here. We were also told that carbohydrates provide quick energy. That's what Melissa told us. And then Lisa told us that they provide, or they provide cell structure as well. So all three of the things that we should have in our brain dump came up in the answer choice, in the correct answer choice. And you want to be careful because the others, maybe at first glance, they looked good, but there were slight errors in each of them. What's the error in answer choice A? What's wrong here in answer choice A? Does anybody see an error there? Yeah, Dejan. So it says it gives the body monosaccharides. That's really awkward wording. It's really the fact that it is giving the body quick energy and it's made up of monosaccharides. So they kind of switch those two things. What about B? What's wrong with answer choice B? The ratio, excellent, JT. So the ratio we know should be 1 to 2 to 1. Instead, here they've got a 2 to 1 to 1 ratio for carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. All right, so that was close. That could have tripped you up if you weren't paying attention, but that's incorrect. D, a macromolecule that is responsible for creating long-term energy for our cells and bodies. What's wrong with that answer choice? Good, Janelle, thank you. So carbs provide short-term energy, not long-term. Excellent. Okay, moving on. Lipids. I know we're supposed to be in the asynchronous portion of class, so I'm going to try to wrap this last part up quickly. But the function, monomer, and atoms that make up lipids are on the screen. The function of lipids is to provide long-term energy. So carbs, short-term, quick energy, lipids, long-term, stored energy. Lipids also provide insulation, and they make up the cell membrane. The monomer of the lipid is a glycerol backbone and 3 fatty acid tails. In this picture of the monomer, you can see the glycerol backbone is represented in blue, and we've got 3 perpendicular fatty acid tails. These tails are perpendicular to the backbone, and so it gives the monomer an E shape, shaped like a capital E. The fatty acid tails are represented in pink here. So again, try to draw out these monomers. They're really simple pictures. Just give your best effort to draw them out. And then the atoms, we've got the same atoms that we had in carbohydrates, but the difference is that the atoms in lipids are not in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. That's an important difference. And it's a difference that you all will be tested on when we take the Unit 1 exam. So lipids do not have that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. In this case, we might have 5 carbons, we might have 12 hydrogens, and we might have 6 oxygens. There's no specific ratio for a lipid. All right, so please make sure you get these 3 things and maybe even the pictures written down. We want to always keep in mind that we want to know 4 things about all 4 of our organic compounds: the function, the monomer, the atoms, and examples. So here are some examples of lipids. Lipids are fats, waxes, phospholipids, and steroids. We'll talk a lot more about phospholipids in Unit 2. Very, very important because they make up cell membranes. And we'll talk about what a cell membrane is. But we can get lipids in a lot of our food sources. Nuts are a good source of fats, healthy fats. Avocados are a good source of healthy fats. Olive oil is a healthier fat. A lot of meats will have fats as well. Butter is a not so healthy fat. So you want to limit the amount of butter that you're intaking. Now, if you're interested in the chemistry of fats, you'll learn more about this in actual chemistry, but some fats, as we can tell, appear in solid form at room temperature, like butter. Other fats appear in liquid form at room temperature, like olive oil or vegetable oil. That has to do with the way that the bonds are present in the fat. There are no double bonds present, meaning we call it saturated. This is a saturated fat. Then it will appear to be solid at room temperature. Unsaturated fats have double bonds. And so they are they're liquid at room temperature. So that's something from chemistry. That's where we get the words saturated and unsaturated fats. A saturated fat is saturated by single bonds. And I'll show you an example of that on the next slide. And then also another important chemical feature of fats is that they don't like water. Lipids do not like water. So you've heard the saying that water and oil don't mix, and maybe you've even seen it. If you've seen a lava lamp is oil that is being suspended in water and heated up. Oil is not going to dissolve in water. That's because of their chemical properties. Lipids.
Ever seen what happens when you put water in hot oil, cooking oil?
What happens?
The stuff like starts popping like crazy. It's like kind of like like a chemical reaction. I done it before. It was on accident too. It was like, I don't know, 2 years ago. I was getting me a cup of water, and I think I had tripped, and we had just got done eating dinner, and then some of the water went in the oil that was still hot, and yeah, it just sounded like firecrackers.
Yep. Yeah, so this is why it's very important that you all, technically, I know when I was, I'm from Chicago, as I've told you all. So in Chicago, you actually have to have a fire extinguisher in your house because you cannot put out oil fires with water. That can actually make the fire a lot worse. It'll spread the fire. So you need a fire extinguisher to extinguish a fire that's base is oil. Okay, but obviously oil is still very flammable, so you've got to be very, very careful with it. So yeah, good point. Something we could probably demonstrate in class if we were in class, but we won't do that. I won't ask you guys to do any experiments at home. But yeah, that's a chemical property. So water is what we call polar, and lipids are non-polar. So they do not like each other. Steroids are also good examples of lipids as well. So here's what I was talking about. This yellow fatty acid tail, we can see our 3 fatty acid tails. One of them is yellow, the other 2 are like a light brown. And here's your glycerol backbone. But the fatty acid tails are basically just long chains of carbon. They're just carbon atoms bonded to each other. This one has nothing but single bonds. We can see these are just like one single lines. They look like dashes next to each other. Okay, so this is what we would consider saturated. It only has single bonds. But here, we can see right here, we've got a double bond. It looks like an equal sign. We've got another one right here, another double bond. And then there's another double bond in this fatty acid as well. So because of this, this lipid would end up being liquid at room temperature because it has these unsaturated fatty acid tails. It's something to keep in mind. Okay. And then lastly, here's a picture of some fat tissue inside of someone's leg. So my question, fat tissue is called adipose tissue. That's the technical term, the medical term. What is the importance of lipids in human beings' bodies? Why do we have fats in our bodies? What do they do for us? Why is it actually a good thing to have some fat in our bodies? Excellent. Yeah, Abigail's thinking correctly. They keep the body warm. Excellent. And Carolyn is also thinking correctly. They provide protection for our organs as well. So we think about all those organs that we have in our torso. We need some type of insulation to not only keep them warm, but also to provide protection for them. Excellent. I can't really say much more, but this is an interesting view. So this is someone who's getting some type of surgery on their leg. They may have had compression syndrome. I think that's probably what's happening. But we can see the adipose tissue present. We can see a tendon as well. And there are probably some other, the bone is under here as well, the tibia. So if you're interested in medicine, you're probably interested and intrigued by this picture. If not, you might be grossed out. I'm skipping that. All right, so we've got 18 minutes left. I think that's going to be ample time to do the asynchronous assignment for the day. It looks a lot like this. What I'm asking you to do is find 4 facts for each of our 2 compounds that we discussed today. 4 facts for carbohydrates and 4 facts for lipids. And then also find 2 similarities that you can put in these circles between them. So the assignment is available on Canvas, and it will take you to a Google slide that you'll have to make a copy of. And then once you complete the assignment, you can do 2 things. Number 1, save it to your Google folder. And then number 2, submit it to Canvas, and then you'll get full credit for it. All right, as long as your facts are good. So you've got 17 minutes at this point. That should still be enough time. I will be on mute. Let me know if you have any questions or if you need any help, and I'll talk to you in a few minutes. Hey folks, so it's now 1:20. You all should go ahead and get ready for fourth block. Please let me know if you have any questions about this assignment or any others, and I look forward to talking to you all tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.
All right.
Thank you. Talk to you later.